This is Big Ideas from the ABC.
A man who, in my estimation, is well ahead of Mary MacKillop for canonisation in Australian circles, although perhaps not via Rome. We're here to discuss this wonderful tome, Hitch 22. Christopher, may I call you Chris?
No.
Thank you, right?
No, you may not. I promised my mother no circumcision of the name. No amputation. That's of the first name.
Right, okay, all right. Well,
I've amputated the second one.
Fair enough too. Well, we'll stick with Christopher then. You've taken on many large and imposing subjects. Henry Kissinger, a woman called Therese or something, I forget her name, and God. But you've taken on something a tad more substantial now, yourself. I thought I'd ask you
This time it's personal.
The first memoir that's actually a sequel. I thought I'd begin by asking, how did you find the experience of writing a memoir as opposed to your usual kind of excoriating grace on other subjects?
Sweet of you to put it like that. Well, tough, because normally I'm making a case, laying one down, trying to be an advocate, trying to explain, trying to marshal evidence and so on. In your own case, you aren't doing that, or I'm not anyway. It's not an apologia. Second, I've normally been trying to see how much I could cram into a given number of words and how economically or tersely I could do it. And with memory, you keep finding, and mine's alarmingly good, you keep finding you recollect more, and you want to get it down while you can, so it balloons out a bit in bags. I gave the publishers much more than they asked for. And then, obviously, I suppose, but it wasn't obvious to me before, you don't know how it ends. So it was very useful to me that the National Portrait Gallery in London published a catalogue of pictures of a group of people who I used to be associated, well, still am associated with, in which I was referred to as the late. Because nothing concentrates the mind more than reading about yourself in the past bloody tense. And it was at that point I thought, well, now I have an answer to the argument, isn't it a bit early? Well, you can't do it too late, can you?
Well, certainly you don't have the option of a prequel, having begun where you did, but perhaps a sequel on its way. How did you define the task of writing your memoirs? Did you rule things in and out at the outset? Or,
yeah.
And what did you rule out and why?
Out first. Anything about people who'd indulged me in any way at all, unless they were dead, or public figures and were asking for it. Because you can't do that fairly unless unless the book is only about those I loved, which it isn't. So I have no copyright in anyone but myself. That was one. Second, on the whole, only to try and write about myself when I was with people or in places that are otherwise intrinsically interesting. So that avoid being boring and try and locate myself in places and times or with people who might attract interest in it on their own, for their own sake. And
what did you find the easiest part of the memoir to write, and what the most difficult?
Can I do that in reverse order?
You may.
The most difficult was about my beloved Mama. So I decided to write that first, about her being taken away from me early and by her own hand in a suicide pact with a lover, an unsuitable lover. And I thought I'd been wondering all my life if I could, this was a long time ago, 1973, whether I could ever or would ever want to write about that. I thought, well, I can't not, so I now find out. And I wrote that in one go, and then read it through, and then I wept, to my own surprise, quite a lot. But then I thought, but I hope no one else weeps about it. I don't want it to be a tearjerker. I don't want it to be sentimental. And I sent it to the publisher and said, if you like this, then I think we can do it. And if you don't like it, I don't want to do it anymore.
Indeed, yeah.
And they were quite nice. They said, if you carry on like that, it should be okay.
And it is, I mean, it's an amazing scene, the way you describe first laying eyes on the Parthenon from a unique location.
Yes, well, my mother's deathbed was a crime scene. So that was a horrifying moment because, as I was told about it on the radio and read about it in the newspaper before I got to Athens, she'd been murdered by her lover, and that's what I arrived there thinking.
A man you'd met?
A man I'd met, and she wanted me to approve of, and I sort of did. I didn't disapprove. He was a gamey guy. My father, I should add, was a very honest and very decent and very upright and thrifty and reliable man. But he bored my mother, and the boyfriend wasn't honest or upright or thrifty or righteous, but he was amusing. He was a spoiled priest of the Church of England. He had once been vicar of St. Martin's in the Fields. He was slightly poetic. He was a bit tubercular. He had the ingredients of romance, but bipolar probably, and depressive. Probably a bad catch. Anyway, but she desperately wanted me to like him. So I sort of gave her my approval. She needed my approval. But I didn't disbelieve that he might have killed her, actually. I thought it was possible. Anyway, once I got to this terrible hotel room in the middle of Athens and realized with this incredibly grisly side that it hadn't been a murder, it had been a suicide agreement.
And what made you realize that?
Well, a letter she left, some photographs the police showed me that I had to look at, all kinds of stuff. What am I saying? All kinds of stuff. I mean, some very harrowing and wrenching and lacerating material. And also the terrible stench of death, because they hadn't been discovered for a little while. I went to the window. I just couldn't stand it anymore. Threw the window open, and suddenly there, on the hill of the Acropolis, was the Parthenon, as if I was seeing it for the very first time. Well, I was seeing it for the very first time, but as if I'd clocked it for the very first time. And in my book I say, well, the first memory I have of my mother is Mediterranean Light. I was crossing the Grand Harbour at Valletta. Some of you may have been there, one of the great Baroque and Renaissance cities of Europe, where Caravaggio did some of his naughtiest painting. And my first memory of her is this flash of blue, green, and white of a lovely Baroque and Renaissance city coming down to the harbour, meeting the green and blue of the sea and the sky. A flash, that's my first memory. A lovely way to have a first memory, and I'm holding her hand. And then this other amazing flash of Greek attic light, but seen from a death chamber. So those are the bookends of my memories of Yvonne, as I call her, because it was her name.
But there's a certain distance in that terminology, isn't there? How did you describe her when you spoke to her? Did you call her mum or mummy? Or?
No, I would call her Yvonne because she liked it. If you're a Navy wife, as she was, my father was a naval officer. Most of my ancestors, male ancestors, are naval and military. The Navy wife would be called Ethel or Marjorie or Joan. I don't know if you're getting a picture. Sterling women all, and representing the British Empire overseas in various bases. And so Yvonne, kind of stylish name by comparison, and she had a bit of class and character, very beautiful, was very well dressed, never embarrassed me at school speech days by wearing the wrong hat or anything like that. She's lovely, and so, and it was a Frenchified name, and I knew she liked it if I called her Yvonne, so I always did.
You refer to your father in the book as the commander. Is that how you spoke to him as well? Or?
Well, that's what the family called him.
Really?
Yeah, rather depressed, rather pessimistic, rather taciturn chap. Yeah, and he'd risen through the ranks to become a commander, and then they let him go.